Oh, that's the webinar. Oh, you're hosting a webinar. Yes, I know how it works. I will say this, if you guys want to follow a hashtag, you are totally free to do that. Follow as many hashtags as you want. Oh,
Hey, can you hear me? That's weird. You can't hear me?
Now I hear you. You couldn't
Okay.
hear you for a second, but now I hear you.
Maybe it just took a minute to connect or something like that.
Crystal Field is on. So, I promoted her to panelist, but she said no, she declined. So,
Okay. All right. Okay. So you have the ability to move people to be panelists. So I'm guessing, is the committee just going to speak? The committee people can speak and attendees have to be like addressed or something like that?
do you want me to make you? I'm going to make you a co-host. Let's do that. Make co-host.
Sure. Let's try. Should we pause the recording? Because since we're just playing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tariq. Welcome everyone to the December Town Hall meeting of the Arts and Culture Subcommittee of Community Board 3, our annual town hall. This is the first time in about almost 2 years since that we will have a town hall. So this is an important moment for our subcommittee and CB3 to reflect on the work that the committee has done and how the pandemic in particular has impacted and transformed arts and culture in the way in which city legislation and budget has impacted our district. And so we've invited a few speakers to report on some of the findings they've done. And that'll be from Ryan Gilliam, the executive director of Fourth Arts Block, who will be presenting on a report that the organization has put together about arts and culture on the Lower East Side. And also we have Eli Dvorkin from Center for Urban Future, who has throughout the pandemic done a number of reports on the impact of the pandemic on arts and culture and the workforce, with quite a bit of hyperlocal data. And we will also have Council Member Margaret Chin, who's been a council member representing Community Board 3 for 12 years now, and we'll have a lot of parting words and updates about her work and legislation and funding that she's been able to move forward, as well as Councilmember Rivera as well. We'll be discussing a range of topics and inviting attendees to present questions and feedback as to how to define and our next year's agenda. So I will I'll let Ryan go first with the presentation. Thank you. Tariq, could you please make Ryan a co-host?
All right. Hi, just trying to set myself up here. I think, okay, there we go. So Ryan Gilliam, I'm the executive director of Fabien Fourth Arts Block. And I'm really just going to present on a project that we worked on through 2021. I'll say just a little bit about the organization, but mostly it's a project focused on cultural equity and how we can advance that in the Lower East Side. So we're a team of artists and organizers working to preserve, strengthen, and grow the cultural vibrancy of the Lower East Side. And for us, the markers of cultural vibrancy, and I should say that our focus area aligns with Community Board 3. So in 2 council districts, but it really goes by those sort of boundaries that outline Community Board 3 and but extend a little bit more into Chinatown. So for us, the markers of cultural vibrancy are that all residents have multiple opportunities to access and participate in arts and culture, that we are home to a diverse network of thriving cultural organizations, that the histories and legacies of this community are honored and shared, and that arts and culture is integrated into everyday life. And through support from a program called Neighborhoods Now that was put together by the Urban Design Forum and Van Allen Institute, we received a lot of pro bono support this past year to work with us to articulate a vision plan for our work in the Lower East Side. A little bit about the community. So this outline that you see on the right, that is the outline of Community Board 3. And you can see both the racial distribution map and also the economic distribution. 2/3 of our residents identify as people of color. 36% of residents are foreign born. 24% of residents are living below the poverty line, which is a higher number than the citywide average. We have 14,000 units of public housing. We have strong contingents of young people and seniors, and our median income is 41,000. And when you look at the sort of maps, you can see that along when you look at the bottom one about economic distribution, along the river, that's primarily where there's a lot of public housing, there's a lot of low-income folks, and that the wealth increases as you go west. And that the racial distribution is similar in that you see that in the wealthier areas, you'll see a larger white population. And that corresponds in many ways, particularly to the East Village. So the challenges to cultural equity in the neighborhood, I mean, all of this is going to be super familiar to everyone here because you know this neighborhood well. But is that, gentrification and displacement has been causing cultural loss. That when you look at this map, you'll see these are culture, arts and culture spaces. We have more organizations, not all of them have space, but you can see that they're concentrated more where we know where the wealth is concentrated also in CB3. There are significant financial barriers to trying to open and even maintain existing communities and cultural spaces. There's not always a strong connection between residents and local culturals. Many local culturals draw audiences from all over the city, but they don't always have a strong engagement with local residents. The cultural histories and markers that we have that talk about the stories of the Lower East Side are not yet fully inclusive, just like most of New York City. And there is a disparity between the amount of creative output that comes out of the Lower East Side and the amount of funding that it receives. So when we're thinking about how to advance cultural equity, we're thinking about opportunities for inclusive cultural participation, how to access and use open space in ways that engage community, how to nurture local engagement, collaboration, and stewardship, and ways to honor multiple histories and cultures of the community. We focus on several places in our plan where we have already been working. We have partnerships with local groups, where we have a history of working there, or they've asked us to come and help them activate these sites. So there are other sites that could be activated, but this is sort of FAB's vision for its work moving forward. And so it reflects where we already have partnerships. So being based on East 4th Street and actually having been the lead in organizing the East 4th Street Cultural District, there are definitely sites there. We have been running the East 4th Street Open Street all this past year, doing weekly programming there. There is a new park that is going to be opened up that has a lot of limitations on it. It's on East 4th between Bowery and Lafayette next to Merchants House Museum. And there's a lot of limitations with that site because it has to have an ongoing vehicle access for Water Tunnel number 3. But it can, there's a lot of ways that site, even though it can't have playgrounds, it can't have lots of tree plantings or anything, could really support cultural activity. And there it is, a half a block from a really extraordinary cultural district with more than a dozen cultural organizations there, and a lot of low-income folks who are living in the Cooper Square MHA buildings, a senior center there. So we think that it's a great place for cultural activity. And the Cooper Square Plaza, which is also kin to Coin, that lower plaza has not really been activated very much. And it's a really important site in Lenape history. And we would love to work with folks of Native American descent, as well as other cultural bearers, to try and bring that history more forward. It's one of the most important sites in the Lower East Side where we can really trace Lenape presence. It's a major crossroads, trading space, place of diplomacy, and it's really not really known very well for that. In Sarah D. Roosevelt Park, we have been part of working with the Sarah D. Roosevelt Park Coalition for several years, working on the Stanton building and returning that to community use. So we've done different kinds of cultural programming with them to help tell that story and engage people in the process of transforming that. We're also working with Mafenda Kalinga Garden on recognition, greater recognition of the Christie Street African Burial Ground, which is the second burial ground for people of African descent in New York City. It's barely recognized. Mafenda Kalinga Garden has been doing a lot of work to draw attention to that. And we've been working with them and helping through arts exhibits and other kinds of things, work with them towards a way that can be permanently memorialized and honored in that space. There's a lot of Black history, again, in the Lower East Side, and we don't always have a lot of places that help tell that story and celebrate it and keep it alive. Avenue B Open Street, we were programming there every Saturday, and we'll continue to work with them and with the Open Street programs and ways to find ways to make those programs really serve the community better. Pier 36 is a space that's had a lot of sort of troubled use, and the Friends of Pier 35 have invited us to work with them on programming and find ways to use arts and culture programming to make that a more welcoming and safe space. We have been doing some pop-up programming in NYCHA sites, and we're working on different avenues to work more closely with NYCHA residents to find ways to activate sites. And the last thing is, as we all know, there is a new amphitheater coming to East River Park, but there's very little plan or vision for how that's really going to be used by the community, by local organizations, local artists, how it's going to be activated. And so we are trying to be a strong advocate for that kind of community use. This is where you can see the full plan if you're interested, fabienmyc.org. And that's really all I have to share. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I was going to open it up for questions and answer, but we have some special speakers and guests tonight with some time constraints. So I'm gonna recognize them. I'm gonna have. I know Councilmember Carlina Rivera has to leave around 7. And so I'm just gonna invite her to speak and then have Councilmember Chin speak right after.
Hi. Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
No worries. I know you just joined, so just gonna recap really quickly that we're here to reflect on how the arts has impacted, how the pandemic has been impacted by the arts, and kind of shape how we should move our subcommittee forward in the new year. And you're also a open culture advocate, and you've moved that legislation forward, but we invite you to speak openly on arts and culture in CB3 generally. So thank you.
All right, well, thanks so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I just want to thank you all for your time. For those of you who don't know, I used to be on Community Board 3, so I totally get what it's like to give many, many evenings and really countless hours. You'll never be able to count the time that you've given, not just to this organization, but of course to our community. And I think that's what really all brings us together, because we want the same thing, which is for people to feel happy and healthy. And that's really has to take a holistic approach. And we can't really talk about healing and recovery without talking about arts and culture. So I want to thank Subcommittee Chair Andrea Gordillo, of course, the incredible local arts leaders. I know we just heard from Ryan from Fab. I know there's a few people that are joining us this evening, as well as District Manager Susan Setzer. So you don't need to tell me, you don't need me to tell you, I should say, that the arts are our city's lifeblood, especially for someone who grew up in the area. It's what we're known for. And people come here from all over the world to have experiences very, very hyper locally too. And the arts and the organizations and venues that make them possible, they're critical to the fabric of New York City. And you all represent who we are as a city, New York City at its very best and brightest. And the pandemic is a public health crisis like we've never seen before, not just for our physical health, but our mental health as well. And I think it just really exposed and laid bare the disparities that we all knew already existed. And arts and culture is going to be so critical to our collective healing as we continue to work toward full pandemic recovery. But I also know that you all didn't get your fair share before the pandemic. So it's really trying to, ring the alarm and be as loud as we can to say that if a lot of us are serious, and not everyone talks the same way I do, not everyone I think considers arts and culture as critical, but I'm trying to do what I can. I know alongside my colleagues, we secured 135 million for small businesses and arts and culture organizations in this year's budget. And here in District 2, I allocated a significant portion of dollars toward 4.37 million in capital funding for critical upgrades and renovations to District 2 arts and culture institutions. That over the past 4 years or so has been tens of millions of dollars that have been brought into this district and the surrounding area. And I know you'll hear from Councilmember Chin, who's also a champion. And then this year, another around 80,000 in discretionary funding to support youth arts and culture education initiatives and programs. And I see so wonderful organizations here that are providing that sort of programming that I know that not only that we need, but that was really forced to pivot during the pandemic, and have done a really wonderful job. I see Tariq here. So in my continued tenure on the council, just so you know, I'm committed to continuing to support our arts organizations, both large and small. I realize that, sometimes the larger organizations in the city, they get a lot of shine. And I know that we have such a wonderful example of Fourth Arts Block and those smaller organizations that make up just this incredible part of the city that I want everybody to know about and to experience. So it's not just funding. I know it is a lot about funding. It's not all. We need to find more opportunities to create access to and for cultural organizations. I'm happy that we mentioned open streets and open culture in this neighborhood throughout the city, bringing people together and creating opportunities for organizations. Open streets was my legislation, and the vision was to always take it and move it to 2.0 and open businesses and bring shows. And when we open our streets to people, I think we've learned that they could be our theaters, but they could also be our gyms, and they can be our community centers and our playgrounds. And it was those lessons that inspired the city council to make the Open Streets program permanent. So really, but expanding it in underserved neighborhoods and requiring the Department of Transportation to create and operate at least 20 open streets distributed equitably across the boroughs, because we know not all neighborhoods have time to really organize volunteers or to independently fundraise. It's just not fair. You can't put those expectations on communities that are really struggling, both historically and currently. So of course, I want to shout out the Lower East Side Open Streets Community Coalition, because they have pretty much created the model for other areas of the city on how to get it done right. So I think, open culture is certainly going to be important to enable some of our beloved arts venues and organizations to welcome New Yorkers back, to engage with the pioneering talent that we're best known for. And I think it was beginning in March of this year, the open culture program allowed for ticketed, socially distanced performances, workshops, and classes in our streets. And as you probably know, arts and culture institutions as well as entertainment venues could apply for an open culture permit from the New York City Street Activity Permit Office for just $20 to host an event at one of 200 locations citywide. And I know that that vision can also be expanded. It's a conversation I've had with Ryan as to who is kind of managing these spaces and bringing up the amphitheater. I think in East River Park is a good example, as well as the Shaft site, the DEP site on East 4th Street, which we know has a ton of potential. I just want to note, I know that people have questions about what's open streets and what's open restaurants. They are all separate programs and they all have their own separate challenges. So maybe we'll touch on that today, maybe not, but I'll wrap up. I'll say it again. You all represent who we are as a city, New York City at its best, at its brightest. I do think we have some great days ahead of us. It'll be challenging, but speaking here with all of you this evening, I am just so proud that our city was able to provide what support we did to our arts and culture organizations. I look forward to continued partnership throughout New York's pandemic recovery and beyond. And you do have me for a little bit longer. I did just win re-election, so I'm not going anywhere, God willing. And I always expect you all to hold me accountable. And I always expect to deliver for you all more than I have in the past. So you have that commitment from me. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to share this space with some of the most talented and committed and compassionate people in New York City. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rivera. I'm going to pass the mic to Councilmember Chin. I think I can speak on behalf of the committee that we're very excited to hear from you and the wealth of knowledge you have of CB3 and arts and culture here. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. And it's great to have partners in City Council that we can work together. I mean, arts and culture is just so important. Just personally, growing up in Chinatown, I remember performing on the street and in Columbus Park, and at a church basement, doing plays, and it's just like we have so much to share of our culture. And in my 12 years on the council, one of the things that I'm really, really proud of is be able to support, more arts and cultural program. There were small organizations. I remember when in my first discretionary budget, like I didn't even know about the Manchu Society, and they teach us, music, Chinese instrument. So my staff, talked to them, met with them, and we gave them the first city council funding, $5,000, and that really got them, going, and they were able to expand their programs. And the whole thing with the capital money that we were able to secure. One of them is working with Councilmember Carlina. It's like supporting the Clemente Soto Velez Center. And this year, I think we also got the money to do their ADA project to make it more accessible. And just seeing the theaters in there, especially Teatro Zaya, I mean, like I remember just going there and watching the shows. They're bilingual, helps me with my Spanish, but they do have, and it just seeing like kids and seniors really enjoying it. I went to other programs, there were other theaters in there, and just be able to really fix up that building and continue to support art and culture there. It was just really one of the proudest project that I think that the city really committed, because I know that building from many, many years ago when I worked for LaGuardia Community College. And what a transformation, just even like cleaning up, the outside, right? All of a sudden become this black building, become this shining building. But the other thing that I think is really important to recognize is that, we were in the council, we were able to bring in this cultural program, after school program for our school, that and really engaging the kids with artists and art organization and seeing them perform and really enjoying. And that program has, expanded tremendously. I mean, during COVID, there was some cutback, but we were able to restore funding. But also we increased, funding for theater of color. We got a lot more smaller theater into that budget line, and also a cultural immigrant initiative that really encourage more artists to work with, whether it's senior centers, community organization, and just really expanding opportunity for artists of color to be able to sort of get the resources that they need to really expand their services. So, and also I think some of the capital dollars that we were able to secure to improve auditoriums in our schools, that really, gives opportunity for kids to be able to kind of enjoy the performance and also be able to get on stage and really be creative. One of the projects that will be coming online, after I retire, but I'm definitely going to be able to enjoy. It was like out of a tragedy that we were able to build something positive. I mean, there was a big fire. I know you're in Chinatown, back then, I don't know, what, 2 years ago. And there were cultural institution in that building, and it was burned down. But we were able to secure funding to rebuild that site. And this year, the mayor committed even more money. So we're going to be able to build it back and create more space for art and cultural organization. That was one of the intentions. But at the same time, there's going to be a performance space, an auditorium where people can showcase, the arts and culture. A lot of people, there are a lot of artists out there, and also amateur artists. People who just love to learn how to sing and dance, and they want to perform and they want a place to do it. And so there will be an auditorium in that site that is accessible, so that handicap accessible, so that people, especially older adults, will be able to enjoy that. And finally, I just want to say that even during this pandemic, one of the positive things that came out of it, in a way, is that there were a lot of creativity, what Councilman Barrera talked about, with the open street, but also online performances that people were able to access, even though they couldn't go out. But like senior centers, the seniors were able to participate in these cultural program or a tour of a museum. And this is a new medium, and hopefully we can continue that. And it's definitely for the Department of Aging. I mean, now they have all these resources and program, and more seniors are getting, tablets, and hopefully, learning how to use this medium and be able to enjoy these arts and culture activity, even though they might not be physically there. So I think that's something that is there's a positive outcome from this, from this pandemic. But going forward, I mean, Councilmember Rivera is still going to be there, and I think that we can count on her, right, going to continue to make sure that the funding increase and to really build on what we have done in the council, especially in this last 8 years. Because the first 4 years was very tough. It was like during the Bloomberg administration, it was budget cut, budget cut, budget cut. But in the last 8 years, we were able to really build up a lot of initiative. And I think recently we just passed the legislation also to allow, to really encourage artists to paint on construction site, so that you don't even just see all these ugly, just boards or whatever. So that is something that I think really will transform our city. And at the same time, I think another positive thing coming out of, pandemic, especially with, all this anti-hate, hatred that's out there, that we have all these murals that appearing all over the city, but in our community. A week back, we just unveiled one right on Suffolk Street. And it was a group for, that really works with kids in the school and artists. And they did this beautiful mural and they did a light show on it. But that's happening all over the city. So these are all the positive, creative energy that has spouted. And we just hope that it will continue. And I really appreciate and thank you for all your work on this. And the advocacy has to continue. But I think, it's just going to be a better city for all of us, because the creativity will begin to expand, and and the younger generation now, the students, I mean, they're gonna pick it up and just keep it going. So thank you for all your efforts and all your advocacy. And it's been my pleasure and my honor, you know, serving this my district, District 1, for the past 12 years and getting to know some of you and being able to see all these wonderful programs that we were able to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Chin. We're very grateful for your service. We welcome you to stick around and listen to the reports and stick around for any questions. I'm gonna pass the mic now.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to leave because I still got two rezoning happening right now. But
Okay.
my staff is on, and Ikana is on. So
Thank you so much.
but thank you. All right. Good night.
In the next weeks. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to pass the mic to Eli Dvorkin from the Center for the Urban Future, and I invite all the attendees to check out their numerous reports on workforce and beyond. He's going to give a report. And Tariq, could you please make Eli a co-host, just in case you have any presentation you might have, Eli. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be back with CB3. I think I've given more presentations at this incredibly hands-on community board than maybe any other in the city. And it's great to see friends. Hi, Olympia. Great to see you also, Councilmember Rivera. We just spoke yesterday. Maybe we can make it a trifecta and do it again tomorrow. But it's really great to be here. I will go ahead and share my screen. We've just got a few slides to share. Can everybody see the presentation? Okay, great. So, so again, thank you so much for the invitation. As Andrew mentioned, I'm the editorial and policy director at the Center for an Urban Future. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan, independent think tank and research organization focused on building a more equitable city. We've done a lot of research over the years on arts and culture. I'll just very briefly, because I know I only have a few minutes, share some of the findings from one of our more recent reports, which was called Creative Comeback, Surveying New York City's Cultural Ecosystem in the Wake of COVID-19. And like all of our reports, this one is available for free on our website, nycfuture.org. So feel free to check out the full report there, as well as many other studies we published about arts and culture and other issues in New York. But just to share a little bit of this study. So this was a report that really focused on the challenges around New York City's, the challenges for New York City's cultural sector during the pandemic. Can you all still see the screen okay? I've got my notes up. I want to make sure it's not blocking it. Okay, great. So, so we put this study together by surveying 643 arts organizations across all 5 boroughs in partnership with the Department of Cultural Affairs and Americans for the Arts. And it's a pretty good cross representation of arts groups in New York, small and large, focused on about 46 different disciplines, as they told us in the survey. And we found some really alarming findings, I think, that are worth flagging, because some of this data, I think, can be powerful in catalyzing the incoming administration. We now have 30+ members of the city council who are newly elected, 5 new borough presidents. I think there's a huge need and an opportunity to educate and inform policymakers about just how the past 20 months have affected the cultural life of New York City. And this report, I think, provides the most accurate picture to date, because it is the largest survey to date of cultural organizations across the city. We found a pretty shocking top-level finding, revenue declines of nearly $1 billion across these 643 organizations. That's about a 36% plunge from where those organizations were a year prior to the pandemic. And the consequences of that revenue loss have been profound. Nearly half of all the organizations that we surveyed have been forced to lay off or furlough staff. And those layoffs hit working artists especially hard. Almost 60% of the artists who work for cultural organizations who lost their creative jobs over the past 18 months or so were still out of work when the survey was completed, more than a year after COVID first hit. So we see an impact on artists, working artists in particular, a huge revenue impact on organizations that, despite the funding that has been flowed from the mayor, the city council, and those federal dollars, it's still well short of making up for those shortfalls that these organizations have experienced. But of course, the impacts are not being felt equally across the city. The survey finds that the impacts have disproportionately hit smallest organizations. Like nearly every aspect of the pandemic, we've seen that organizations and individuals who were already facing some serious challenges before COVID, were more vulnerable to the impacts of this crisis. The average small organization saw operating income plummet by nearly half in 2020, which is much steeper than the larger organizations. And across the board, however, we found that half of all organizations have lost access to a physical space, which has obviously made the reopening much, much harder. But even more so than the size of the organization, perhaps the biggest determinant on whether that organization had fared more poorly during the pandemic than others was whether or not that organization identifies as one that is serving or led by or accountable to BIPOC individuals or communities. So we asked that question in the survey, and we found significant disparities. In fact, BIPOC-led organizations were significantly more likely to report a severe financial impact from the pandemic. They were less likely to be confident in their long-term survival. And I think significantly, they were twice as likely to report that their entire staff was laid off or still furloughed, making reopening much more challenging. In particular, we found that the crisis has taken a much more severe toll on arts organizations that were based in lower income communities. So we looked at the survey, broke it out by zip code, and we found that fully 25% of organizations in New York City's lowest income zip codes reported losing access to their only physical space during the pandemic. And that's double the rate of organizations located in wealthier communities. So when it comes to actually being able to reopen, many of the organizations located in New York City's lower income zip codes don't have a physical space to reopen, period. And there's a major equity issue there when it comes to figuring out what a recovery will look like, what a just recovery will look like. We also found that there are still some, that it's not all bad news, that there are some encouraging signs of hope. The report found some pretty encouraging signs of resiliency, and it's not surprising when you talk to artists and arts organizations. I think the frustration there is a feeling that the city takes the resiliency of artists and arts organizations for granted. That of course artists are resilient, of course artists can make something out of nothing. That trust is perhaps a little bit dangerous, given what we've seen in terms of the disproportionate impacts of the pandemic on organizations in lower income communities. But we did find that that most organizations are planning a comeback. Organizations are saying they plan to reopen, they will be able to come back. Although we did find that almost 3% of organizations surveyed have closed completely or don't expect to return, which is a really profound loss for New York City. And of course, 3%, not just of the 647, but if that number holds true across all of the small arts organizations and community-led spaces in New York City, that's a profound loss that we've yet to really reckon with as a city. But it is encouraging to see that so many organizations are planning a comeback one way or the other. The other thing that the survey found that I think is cause for some hope is that organizations have been innovating during the pandemic. We mentioned just earlier about all the organizations that started delivering virtual programming. Well, the study found that 65% of the arts organizations in New York City started delivering virtual programming for the first time during the pandemic. And more than half said that they had been increasing or expanding their work around racial equity or racial justice during the pandemic, which, even if that's in some cases not necessarily backed up with major funding commitments or staffing changes or structural changes, that's a really encouraging sign that organizations are taking seriously not only the impacts of the pandemic, but the mass movement around racial justice that we've been experiencing, especially in the wake of the George Floyd murder. I also wanted to just point out that we asked very specifically about what arts organizations say that they'll need to be able to come back strong. And unsurprisingly, given the scale of the financial losses that we've seen, organizations need more funding to reopen, rehire, to return to full strength. But the report found that organizations reported that technical assistance is just as much of a need, and I think that's really important. Even prior to the pandemic, when I've spoken with all kinds of small arts organizations around the city, there's a general perception that the biggest barrier is the cost of a lease, and there's no question that to start an organization, that's true. But for many of the organizations, including small performance venues, DIY spaces, artist-run collectives that have closed over the past 10 years, and we've counted dozens and dozens of organizations that have shut their doors, it wasn't always because of the rent. In many cases, it was because of a lack of technical assistance, not having, and this could be a financial barrier, but not having access to an architect, an engineer, somebody to help with soundproofing, somebody to help with negotiating DOB violations, health code violations. There's so many elements of the operational challenges where technical assistance was really what was the key factor in a space closing. And we've seen that many organizations are saying that's what they need right now. And we find that there's really a gap in terms of being able to access those services, especially for organizations that don't have the ability to afford that. Organizations are looking for help with real estate, technical assistance, with marketing, with board development, with space upgrades, and all kinds of other forms of specialized expertise. So what do we do about it? I mean, there's only a minute or two left, and we've got lots of recommendations just in this report, as well as many others on our website. But we certainly wanted to highlight a few things. I mean, we think that there's a real need for the city to play a bigger role in 2022. We recommend bringing services, the kinds of technical assistance that the report highlights, directly into some of the city's hardest hit communities by setting up a network of artist resource centers based in currently vacant storefronts citywide, as well as establishing a dedicated helpline for arts organizations seeking support, which is something similar to a program that London launched about 4 years ago that's already helped hundreds of organizations in London deal with everything from challenges with their landlords to dealing with noise violations. That culture at risk helpline in London has been really effective, and we'd love to see something like that here in New York. But of course, to support a full revival for arts and culture in the city, we're going to need to see more than just the Department of Cultural Affairs involved. We're fortunate that DCLA's funding was restored last year, but DCLA is still one of the very smallest agencies in New York City. It is just a fraction. It gets about 2% of the funding of the police department, a tiny fraction of the funding that we put into the Department of Corrections, that we put into the Department of Citywide Administrative Affairs, which is about 7 times larger than the Department of Cultural Affairs. So it can't just be DCLA alone. We recommend that the next mayor enlist every city agency in a much more robust effort to support the arts, from the Parks Department to the Department of Transportation, DOE, city planning. We haven't ever seen that level of coordination, and it's what's needed. So next steps should include sustained multi-year funding for arts groups to program and maintain those public spaces that are now more accessible than before through the Open Culture Program, but where equity and access won't be possible without sustained funding to actually maintain and care for those spaces. We want to see new initiatives to connect artists with thousands of art spaces located in public schools, which are not used about 2/3 of the day and over 1/3 of the year. We'd love to see expanded programs to offer ticketed performances again. And the Artist Corps program was an example of what's possible, but it can't just be a one-off. It can't just be a one-time, program with delivering small grants to artists. And it needs to be coordinated with efforts to actually use city-owned spaces so that those spaces can be activated and actually be a revenue generator for artists and arts organizations. We'd like to see, in a similar vein, new opportunities for artists to actually vend their works in public, whether that's through street fairs or public plazas, using spaces like the giant parking lots underneath the BQE, and a major expansion of the Public Artist in Residence program, which only exists in 3 city agencies today. Why not put a program in every city agency by the end of 2022? So those are just a few of the ideas. I think there's significantly bigger needs around long-term affordability, which this report only just touches on. Certainly finds that is the challenge on everybody's mind moving forward. And we actually have a report coming out early in the new year that's focused on exactly that, tapping into the opportunity that a rare downturn in the real estate market represents to pursue the goal of long-term affordability across New York City. Some of those ideas would include things like down payment assistance programs, city-backed master leases that could provide below market rate spaces for long periods of time with the guarantee that spaces could expand or contract as arts organizations grow or shrink. We'd love to see a concerted effort to build 5,000 new units of artist live workspace. The city launched a goal of creating a space for artists through EDC. It was an incredibly modest goal, I think, of establishing about 450 spaces. And we didn't achieve that goal in 8 years, but we think that goal is frankly too modest. Setting a goal that's a lot bigger and I think is still achievable would make a big difference in terms of being able to actually catalyze the development of new live work space for the arts. And certainly leveraging more of those city-owned buildings, not only the city schools, but so many buildings that the city controls that have empty floors, where there's offices that are now closed because folks are working from home, where there's opportunities to work with the private sector, whether that's commercial office buildings, hotels, or storefront retail spaces, and create a lot more space that could be used for the arts. So let me stop there. So grateful for your time. Happy to answer any questions. And certainly for much, much more, take a look at our website, nycfuture.org. And thanks again.
Thank you, Eli. Appreciate the recommendations. And thank you to the rest of our speakers. We still have Kana from Councilmember Chin's office and Isabel from Councilmember Rivera's office. So I'm just going to invite our committee members to ask any questions they might have to any of the speakers, and then I'll move to attendees while we have them here.
I can break the ice. Hi, everybody. Hi. By the way, I always call you Ellie. Is it Eli?
Yeah, it is Eli. But in every other country in the world, it would be Ellie. So, I don't take it the wrong way.
Okay, good. And thank you also, Ryan. I mean, one of the things that struck me in the presentations that you gave me about that you gave us about, the impact of the pandemic, etc., is one of the missions of CB3 and especially of our subcommittee is how would we preserve, affordable culture, especially in terms of, those that serve communities that are poorer and have less access. And I am afraid that, what happened during the pandemic is that, of course, the ones who weathered it better were the ones who had the means to bridge over, and all the relief programs that were put out, in my experience, especially working with music workers and with the affordable, like with grassroots cultural spaces, basically they came out too late and they were too complex. And so that's why I'm afraid a lot of them are gone, and to reestablish that ecosystem that was fragile, but kind of still thriving, or like at least it was still existing with roots, I think maybe we need to start advocating for specific interventions that focus on those folks, like urgently. I don't know if my suggestion makes sense to you, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, Olivia, I really appreciate that. In general, I totally agree. I certainly think there's a lot that we need to do, and to me, the answer is all of the above. All of this and more. But to your point, I think that's partly why I was so struck by the demand out there for technical assistance. That organizations know what they want to do, what they need to do, but often just lack some of the expertise to navigate these systems, the bureaucracy of the city, the challenges of dealing with enforcement agencies, which are, not helpful generally, but antagonistic. And a lot of that is either expensive or requires a level of kind of knowledge of the bureaucracy that's challenging, or both. And there's language barriers that then get in the way, cultural barriers and other things too. So part of my takeaway is that that's so needed in general, and specifically in communities that have been hit hardest by the pandemic, that you need to bring those resources to where people are. It can't be enough to just say, you can travel to Manhattan and go to one location, but to actually put those kinds of resources in communities and have them be operated by folks who are trusted in the community. Make that a program that artists can actually apply to and get grant funding to work in those spaces, to help operate them in partnership with legal assistance organizations or architects from the community, volunteer engineers, sound designers, or whoever else. So it's ambitious, but I think something like that would actually be really transformative. It would start to get at some of those inequities that you're talking about. One other thing too that came up in a report that we published about a year ago, which is focused on immigrants in the arts in New York. And if you're interested, you can check that out. It's called The Changing Face of Creativity in New York City. And it really finds that over the past decade plus, that not only have we seen a huge surge in the number of professional immigrant artists in New York, as well as obviously many, many other immigrant New Yorkers who are themselves artists, but who earn their living in other ways. But we also found that there were some unique challenges that have really threatened the arts ecosystem in immigrant communities in New York. And one of the things that came out of that report was the need to create much stronger, I think, city infrastructure to support cultural or creative entrepreneurship. Many of the organizations, the artists that we spoke with said, we're tired. We aren't 501c3s. We don't want to go down that road. We're tired of kind of being on this treadmill of having to, scrape for funding. DCLA's funding mechanisms, obviously for arts organizations, first of all, are limited to 501c3 organizations generally. But also those organizations then need to have, 2 years of records on the books. Then you may be eligible for, $1,500 or, $2,000. So the idea that that's going to be sustainable when you've got bills to pay right now is a huge challenge. And I was really struck in that reporting how many artists, especially immigrant artists, told me, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to become self-sufficient with an entrepreneurial venture. And I want to be able to hire folks from the community and create a system that's self-sustaining. And obviously, the city can help with that, but we have relatively limited infrastructure. We have limited infrastructure in general to support small business, small businesses in immigrant communities and lower income communities across the city. But even less of that is actually specifically focused on creative entrepreneurs. So we have recommendations in that report about how you actually strengthen the ecosystem to support cultural entrepreneurship. And I think that's a huge missing piece right now. Which would make a big difference, and where we have some assets on the ground. For instance, the city's 217 branch libraries are basically the default space for folks to access small business assistance resources in about 2/3 of neighborhoods across the city. There is no other publicly funded hub for small business assistance, but we've only funded that in a really limited way. So there is some infrastructure in place. There's also other great organizations that focus on supporting low-income entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs in low-income communities, but aren't necessarily equipped with the skills or the resources to support creative entrepreneurs particularly well. So there's an opportunity to tap into those organizations, but help them connect with folks that actually understand creative entrepreneurship. There's opportunities to use existing assets like libraries. I think there's just a ton of potential to expand supports for technical assistance and entrepreneurship assistance in creative communities around the city as part of what I think is missing right now. So I don't know if that totally addresses your question, but I definitely see that as a big missing piece in the infrastructure that we have in the city right these days.
Thank you.
Thank
Ryan,
you.
do you have any thoughts?
I mean, mostly what I track at FAB, we have a membership of 45 local arts organizations, right, throughout the Lower East Side. And there's a lot more that we have close relationships, although they're not officially members. We have very, very few folks, I mean, like less than 5 that are in commercial leases. The reason that folks have been able to stay in the Lower East Side is either because they own space, they're in protected space where they're leasing from another nonprofit or a church or, or from the city itself. So commercial spaces for arts activity are almost disappeared. And the people that we hear from the most who are struggling the most sometimes to stay in the neighborhood are those that 4 or 5 that are in commercial leases. So that's our picture, here when it comes to organizations. I would also just say that what I'm hearing, so we're doing a series of, sort of interviews and site visits now. For our organizations, they are not out of the pandemic, all right? They are still, trying to make ends meet and trying to find ways to re-engage audiences and restart. And it's, when things like, the new variant comes up or, anything that is going to throw people from feeling comfortable in gathering spaces, no matter the precautions, just, feel comfortable, can really extend the way that this pandemic affects organizations. So we see people like sort of getting ready, but getting ready cautiously to try and reopen, and they're trying to hold on to that online programming. And sometimes they're sort of, creating that as a new income stream. But it's really still kind of touch and go about what's going to be impacted. There's certainly a lot of hiring going on for tech staff. People are really trying to scramble and come up with folks, and there's not, so there's kind of a demand to restart, but it's not yet. Nobody's feeling stable. Everyone's feeling like sort of tentative, and the places that do have performances, I don't think have seen like a full audience return yet. But other folks who are working on the ground could contradict that, but that's some of the stories that we are hearing and listening to. And it's one of the reasons that we're continuing to think through 2022 about how outdoor venues can support and provide income for artists. And we think those are still really important part of the mix. As many different platforms as you can have that aren't just inside gathering spaces. That's not a direct response, but I did get a little, Eli had my brain going a different way. So.
Well, I just wanted to say, I really appreciate and agree with what Brian was just saying, but the idea of alternative, revenue sources right now still seems incredibly urgent because we're not out of this yet. As much as the relief efforts have not been sufficient to, I think, make up even close to the shortfall that organizations have experienced, we calculated that just based on those 647 organizations, we're looking at least $175 million that's still missing and unaccounted for, even after the federal dollars that the city got and the restoration of DCLA's budget, et cetera. So that's a huge gap. But obviously people are still feeling concerned, and understandably so, and organizations are still not seeing full houses and not back to regular programming. So one of the things I think we talk about virtual programming, only some of the organizations that I've talked to have said it's been helpful from a revenue perspective. Some have, though. But again, there's huge gaps in who's been able to do that effectively. And some of those things are really technical. Some of it's financial. You have to be able to afford, cameras and streaming software. But some of it is just understanding how to do that effectively and how to monetize it effectively. And I talked to somebody who said, I actually helped a small organization, set up a Patreon, and it's not even live streaming, but it's just recordings of some of their performances, and that's generating a few $100s a month that they didn't have before. So there are opportunities there, but you have to be able to focus, I think, some of that assistance on closing those gaps. Those are really tangible things. It's not pie in the sky, but it's got to be done, it's got to be done effectively with trusted community partners. And then I think even more so is that idea of outdoor performance spaces. And Ryan, I'm curious if you think folks in the neighborhood have been able to take advantage of open streets for culture, open culture, effectively from a revenue perspective. To me, one of the recommendations we've consistently put out there is let's make better use of parks. It's really frustrating to me to see how many amazing, almost natural performance spaces there are in our public parks, from just quiet corners all the way through to actual amphitheaters that were built in the Moses era. But we don't allow those spaces to be used for arts and culture generally, certainly not for ticketed performances. And while there's exceptions, obviously, Shakespeare in the Park or whatever, if you wanted to just, throw a show at, Evergreen Park in Ridgewood, Queens, you can't really do that, even though there's an amphitheater that's there. So, the idea of not only just to be able to do something outdoors, and obviously with the Arts Corps grants, some artists were able to figure that out and put on performances in parks even, but for free. So yes, there's a grant, but they're not able to actually, sell tickets. And, I feel like in this moment, that's a missed opportunity. I totally understand the resistance to the perception of commercializing, public spaces, but I think the reality is that New Yorkers would actually support the arts that way, but we need spaces to be able to do it. So, I think open culture being, a permanent program is a step in the right direction. We need things, I think like shared kit apart spaces, where amplified sound can be set up and shared among, multiple venues, the ability to have a ticket booth in a specific area, somebody needs Square or another payment processor on a device with a Wi-Fi hotspot. It's not impossible, but there's a lot of pieces that need to get to be in place to actually make that effective from a revenue perspective. But I think it's absolutely possible. There are, architecture firms like Situ Studio in Brooklyn that have come up with ideas for how to do that. There are tech companies that would be interested in helping to set up, the Wi-Fi signal or to help, with the payment processing part of this. But, there needs to be leadership to put it all together. So anyway, let me stop there. But I do see a lot of need for alternative strategies to help support revenue generation, even outside of just getting venues reopened.
I mean, the one piece that we are missing, and it's unfortunate that right now we don't have any of our electeds, but we do have staff that they can report, is, the sad thing that is happening, that is unemployment benefits are expiring as we're speaking, right? And as you said in your report, that people haven't been able to go back to work, especially performing artists. And unfortunately, last year, we had a tiny bit of hope for a WPA style law to pass with this New York State budget that unfortunately didn't go anywhere. And then it was transformed in this tiny program of grants that is the New York City Artists Corps that it's already finished. And I think this may also be something that we all need to come together and advocate if we want to have any of our artists being able to be artists in the long term, because as you all said, like, we are not back, we're not out of the pandemic, especially those hit by the pandemic, because there were people who went through the pandemic unscathed. And especially in arts and culture, our labor that was always mistreated now is, my fear is going to be decimated, like, seriously. And I think it will take bold action from our elected officials and budget decisions in the next year if they want to support, art labor, because it's just kind of the elephant in the room right now. I mean, and I know the organizations are also struggling, but the artists, I think, are the ones that, I don't know how to describe it in English, but I could have a lot of words in other languages.
Yeah, I mean, I do certainly agree with that. I would just say, I think, a significant expansion of the art artist corps would be incredibly helpful, but something a little bit more strategic, tied to other community needs. So really understanding how to actually help put artists to work in collaboration with community-based organizations, using public spaces and resources in ways that were not on the table, but really being open about, using plazas, using parks, spaces that have never been activated for anything other than parking, like under the BQE, or under the Metro North in Harlem or the Bronx. Like those are opportunities where the city has resources and assets, funding for artists themselves is part of the equation, but then also working together with community organizations around what would actually be useful in the community. And there's so many amazing examples to inspire kind of thinking about that. Artists who've been leading mutual aid networks, the program, the Fabien Collective in Little Manila and Queens, which has done amazing programming, facilitated and led by artists, but with, input from restaurant owners and workers, throughout the community, doing mural projects and activating public spaces. That could and should be happening at such a bigger scale. And I think, Olympia, you're right that, state dollars would have helped, to make that, bigger and better. And I think there is an opportunity for that to happen next year as well. But I think that's a huge opportunity to really put artists back to work in service of an equitable recovery in a much more coordinated and big picture way. And I hope that's something that could happen next year.
Thanks, Eli. I want to invite members of the public to ask any questions or offer any feedback in the interest of time. And also, I forgot to invite everyone to please sign in with your name and affiliation. So yeah, if anyone would like to ask any questions, I welcome you all.
They can raise their hands, right?
I believe so, yes. I'm looking at it and I don't see any raised hands.
Oh, there is one.
It's from Thomas. Go ahead, Thomas.
I just wanted to piggyback off of what Olympia said. And Eli, I think you made a very compelling case for this. If we can support, obviously we do support the arts via some sort of a resolution in addition to reaching out to the electeds, it would be amazing because the city really went to bat with the food service and the restaurants. And, they were willing to take risks that weren't used before. But like you said, a lot of times the for-profit arts have basically been neglected. So we have tons of spaces. I definitely will be reaching out to you to just collaborate on how we can use the spaces already. We've had many community groups use spaces in my school. We're on East 4th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue. And we definitely would like to get that going again because it's necessary, especially with the social emotional impact. We're living in this in real time. The students are suffering greatly. The families do not have outlets. So, any kind of supplemental arts that we can provide, that's absolutely therapeutic and helps to resolve a lot of the traumas. I'm working with this every day with special needs students. So, I'll reach out to you soon, but I just definitely thank you because I think you reinvigorated my hope that we can really get something significant going on. And I like the route you're going. It's very ambitious and it needs to be done. So I just want to commend you on that. Thank you.
Really appreciate that, Thomas. Thank you. What's the name of your school?
It's the Manhattan School for Career Development, also known as 751M.
Yeah, got it. Cool. That's fantastic. Well, thanks for that. And thanks for everything you do.
Thanks. Again, if anyone has any questions, please free to raise your hands. If there's any priorities or, potential solutions, anyone would like to ask questions, I definitely invite you. But I have a short question, which might not be so short of an answer. But one of the things this committee has a challenge with, I would say, but also an opportunity, is that, arts and culture is very holistic as an industry and as a thing in our society. And so we have a lot of different agencies to engage with. And the DCLA is unique in that it doesn't operate in the same ways that other agencies do. So I guess my question is like, how could we best engage different agencies, whether it be the DOE, whether it be SBS, parks, in an effective way, and what would be for both Eli and Ryan, what would be like a priority in the next administration? Yeah, sorry, I know that was so tough.
I think Eli's got a lot of preparation behind that.
Well, Ryan, I was going to defer to you, so I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I'm happy to go if you prefer.
I mean, I'll just jump in to say that from just speaking from a local perspective, I think one of the ways that you can engage agencies as the Arts Committee of CB3 is to try and talk to them specifically about cultural projects they are already involved in, right? To open that conversation. So you could ask an agency that has like an artist in residence to come with their artist in residence and make a presentation about how they're working on that. And then you can open up questions about how else could arts and culture work at your agency. So I would start with specific things. Same with like talking to parks. Talk specifically about these local parks, or ask for something with the Parks Committee, right? Say Parks Committee, we want to co-host a meeting, and let's talk about how arts and culture is and isn't working in parks within CB3, because honestly, parks has been incredibly difficult to work with, but and DOT doing the open streets programs, how arts and culture is working there. I think it was just like ground it specifically in things that have happened and that you want to get information about, because that kind of invitation usually can get a response, right? And DCLA is just so tiny, it's just like, they're just terrified. Like they start visiting one community board, they're going to have to go talk to all of them, and their staff will do nothing else. So that's just my sort of pragmatic thinking about how to activate those conversations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice, and definitely a platform to talk about what they're already doing is a great way in. I think that's really true. I guess maybe it's just because I have a somewhat of maybe a slightly more kind of confrontational spirit some days, but I think there is another opportunity, which is obviously we have to see who the next chair of the Culturals Committee will be, and I don't have any secret tea leaves. I don't know who that will be, but we'll find out soon enough. And at that point, I think I really think it's one thing that's achievable is an interagency hearing on how city agencies are working with and supporting the arts, and I think obviously the chair of that committee would have to run point on that. The council speaker would be very helpful if that person sees the value of something like this as well, obviously. But I don't think that's impossible, and it would be something, certainly agencies cannot be compelled to testify, and some may not show up. But I think there could be something really powerful about a council hearing on that topic. Obviously, the agencies that are already doing this have an opportunity to kind of share what they're doing. Sanitation is a great example, but I think it would be powerful as an interagency hearing focused on other ideas. So just to get the ball rolling, to have incoming commissioners have to prepare some talking points on either what they're doing, what they'd like to be doing. Certainly, the agencies that already have an artist in residence program or otherwise involved really should be testifying. But it would be really powerful to have that committee chair invite every commissioner to testify and see what people say. You may be pleasantly surprised that some of the incoming commissioners have an interest in the topic, and it may be something that that hasn't been tried before. So that's one other suggestion. I think obviously starting with obviously CB3's own council member who is engaged in these issues, whoever the new chair of the committee is, and to put that idea out there. We'd love to see a hearing in the new year focused on how every agency, not just DCLA, can support the arts, and there might be some interest there.
Andrea, can I throw in one more thing, which is
yeah.
just to build on this idea of coalition building. So there's a lot of community boards, because I'm just really answering about how the community board itself could, engage and advocate. There's a lot of community boards that have an arts and culture subcommittee. As far as I know, they've never all gotten together and said, let's co-host something, and being together is going to put more pressure on some of the people we want to show up and talk to us. But there's so little avenue between how community boards might work with DCLA or any other, within the arts and culture realm, right? There's just no clear path there. And so it's like trying to invent one. either as CB3 or in coalition with other arts and culture groups to, put enough pressure so that we actually get a response. I sit on the Parks Committee on CB3, no, arts and culture, and like we get presented to like, like all the time, so trying to make some way where there's some dialogue in the arts and culture realm would help not only this community board, but all the community boards, because I don't think any of them have that kind of access. And you might work with the borough president's office, right? Because again, if you could recruit them to be part of that effort, being as community boards are kind of their baby, again, you might be able to open that dialogue and keep it going, but yeah, I think I'm of the say invite Carrot, like come tell us about your great success. We're so interested. And then you have them there, and then you can start asking the questions that you'd like to dig in. They're a little harder to answer.
Definitely. Yeah. I'm reminded of the 2017 cultural plan. One of the big points of the plan was interagency cooperation. I think that Councilmember Van Bramer and all the different folks that were involved with the planning saw that as a really salient point. And so, yeah, that resonates with me certainly to in the next administration to provide some sort of oversight, just to provide more support to the arts and cultural industry in general. So, yeah. Any other questions from our attendees or panelists? Crystal, I think you have your hand up. Go ahead. I'm going to unmute you.
What do you think about Charas and the possibility of having one other very important venue for arts and culture on the Lower East Side?
So, Eli, are you familiar with the site? I don't know if you might be or not.
Actually, I think I missed the first part of that. Which site are you
Crystal
talking
was
about?
asking you about Charas El Bojillo. It was a former school and community.
Oh, yeah.
On Ninth Street.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know much about the project. I'd love to hear more. I think I saw an article about it, a little while ago, maybe more than a little while ago, a couple of years ago, and I haven't really followed up on where things are today.
It was
Go ahead.
started many years ago by ex-members of a gang, actually, who wanted to go into an alternative kind of world. And they were very successful. It was a very, very important part of this area of the city. There was a theater there. There were many art galleries there. There were all kinds of important community seminars, and the surrounding community was very, very much a part of it. And during the administration of one of the mayors of this city, whose name I've conveniently forgotten, it was sold. The building was sold. At that time, that mayor also wanted to sell all the gardens in the area and in other parts of New York City, and there were also theaters on the auction block. It was a terrible, terrible time. However, the community wanted that building so badly that they refused to allow the new owner, to develop it. And it has sat in our area for all these years. And it's becoming, it's degenerating. The building itself is going down. It was actually landmarked by this community in order to save it. And we have been asking for city help to make this happen for I don't know how many years. And it's just, they want to, and they say over and over that they want to do it, but it never gets done. And the whole area, especially on the way east, where NYCHA is, that building, that serves that area. And we are a little west of it. We're on First Avenue, but it would be so important for this area to have that resource. So I wondered if you might take a look at that, because that building could be an incredible place for art. I mean, I don't know how many stories. It's got a lot of floors. It was a school at one time, many years ago, and just fell on bad days and was empty. And that's how these guys got into it. And these people that started it were big members of this community. They were from Puerto Rico and coming to New York, and the whole area was just, anyway, it's still a very important part. There are parts of the East Village that are still underserved, and lots of poor people in the area and could really greatly benefit from this very large, beautiful building. Anyway.
I forget when I saw this article at least a couple of years ago, but I do remember reading about the project. I think it was in the New York Times a couple of years back. And obviously it's been vacant for, 20 years now, right? Something like that. But, I don't know all the ins and outs of the, issues with the developer and everything else, but, and planning and the whole story. But, absolutely. I mean, to me, it's like there are spaces in every neighborhood that could become anchors for the arts with the right vision, and I seem to recall that Mayor de Blasio actually mentioned something about, hey, maybe the city could purchase that building again. I mean, this must have been, 5 or 6 years ago. So anyway, I obviously I'm not an expert in this particular project, but to me, absolutely, there are spaces that are absolutely ideally suited to become, cultural hubs. Many communities, or almost every community, have spaces along those lines. And, the next mayor, I think, needs to have some real vision when it comes to using city dollars to create those opportunities. I don't know if that's possible with the current owner of that building. Maybe something is. In some cases, I think it could be a city-backed master lease that could, create long-term affordability without necessarily having to be an outright purchase. And in other cases, absolutely, the city could take capital dollars and buy buildings and renovate them. But and has done that effectively, or with nonprofit partners like the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So, I definitely hear you. I think there's a ton of opportunity there. But I know that, it's been empty for 20 years, so that may be a tough fight, or has already been. And if folks have specific thoughts about, existing community organizations that have, plans in place or would have alternative proposals to, what the developers put forward, I'd certainly be super curious. I think this is part and parcel with, some of the research that I've been doing around leveraging empty or distressed real estate to create long-term affordability for the arts. So, I'd welcome that conversation, and I'd certainly love to learn more if folks want to reach out. Let me put my email in the chat as well, in case anybody wants.
Yeah, that would be great, because in the attendees, we have two of the organizations that are leading some of the, research around charas. It's just too complex. Right now they're in foreclosure. So, and there was a promise, of course, from de Blasio that he didn't deliver, among other things that he didn't deliver. Even though today there were some good news, guys, I should share, because I rarely read good news. It's basically a very important institute, and I can find it, did analysis of the data of inequality in the city And the last 8 years of the de Blasio administration, indeed, the gap between rich and poorer shrinked, not too much, a tiny bit, but in terms of the history of the city, it was historic. So a lot of the policies that were implemented around minimum wage and pre-K and other issues did increase the income for the poorer people of the city. And so I guess it's sad that we need to be happy for something so little, but it is historic in so many ways. So yeah, there were some good news. Let's just follow this trajectory and completely eliminate this gap.
Any final questions or comments from anyone else? Paul?
Would you mind if I said a few words?
Please do, yes. Paul is our new chair, Eli, for your reference, so.
How you doing? I apologize. It seems like whenever I become my chair of something, I get sick. So my voice is a little out, and I took my first sick day in over a year today. So that's where I'm at. But I just want to say congratulations and thank you to the entire Arts and Culture Subcommittee for putting this together today. All the speakers, our elected officials, the entire committee. Who do I see? I see Andrea. I see Ryan, who's one of our board members, and it was a wonderful presentation. Olympia, Tariq, Thomas. I know there's other board members and the attendees as well. Thank you all for this wonderful. And I took a picture of the recommendations Eli put up, so I can have it on my phone and I can reference it at some point. And Ryan, there was something you had mentioned right at the beginning, and that was putting the boards together. So I now that I've been chair for about a week, I've reached out to other board chairs and meeting with them and seeing what they're thinking of doing about a lot of different things. And this is going to be definitely on my agenda items coming up, and speaking with those other board chairs and what they've been doing, and maybe creating this super conglomerate of boards to help with what's going on. So once again, congratulations on tonight. This sounds great. And I look forward to supporting as chair. Thank you. And my voice is gone. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Feel better. Lots of garlic and ginger. Thank you. All right. If there are no further questions, I'm happy to adjourn. I really appreciate all the time and effort, both of you, Eli and Ryan, and then also Councilmember Shin's office had to go, but thank you, Councilmember Carlina Rivera. I think there's a lot of great, parting advice from all of you, and I look forward to our work in the new year and seeing you all then, barring another situation with the variant. So stay safe, everyone, and thank you for your time. Oh yes, one more call. Yeah.
I hate to be a stickler on these things, but is this an actual subcommittee meeting today or just the town hall? Because you may have needed to take attendance both at the beginning and at the end. So
this is just a town hall. It's not an official meeting.
No official. Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure. I don't want to get in trouble on day one. So I want to.
Yeah, no, I would have gotten all this office stuff, but
all right.
Andrea, just want to say thank you to you for taking lead and organizing all of this. So on behalf of the committee, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Have a good night.
Night.